Hello.
Hi. Good.
How are you, Dr. Agavi?
How are you?
Good to see you
You
again.
too. You too. Thanks for having me back.
Oh, thank you for so much coming back on
Thank
a
you.
Wednesday night. And I know life is always hectic and crazy and kids and work and everything. So
Absolutely.
thank you so much. We had a lot of fun and just it was so nurturing last week. The lecture that you gave on women's burnout and roles, and definitely looking forward to tonight's lecture.
Mm-hmm.
To those who chimed in, welcome back. This is our lecture 2 series on our mental wellness series. We welcome again Dr. Christine Agaby, and we spoke about her briefly. I think not enough, but again, I resort to for her website on her scholarship, her resilience, all her work on her 23 years in her therapy. Just a great asset for our community and for the world. So thank you for being you, and thank you for supporting Women's Ministry. We're so excited again to have you in lecture 2 of 3.
Mm-hmm.
And tonight we will be talking about, I'm just going to pull up also, I want to give a blurb to those who are listening as well. Let me just go back. So I spoke about Christine's introduction, but I'm going to give another blurb as we did last week. Dr. Christine Agaby received her master's and doctorate graduate training in counseling psychology. She is the current chair of the Special Interest Group on Religious and Spiritual Issues in Counseling Psychology in the American Psychological Association, the APA Counseling Psychological Division. Over 23 years, Dr. Agaby's professional research and clinical interests have been the areas of resilience and positive psychology, much needed today more than ever, religion and spirituality, women's issues, and diversity. And you've presented on over 45 regional, state, national, international conferences, and all over the Coptic world and all over the international world. You've been here before, and we hope and pray that we continue to grow our relationship and that you will contribute definitely to the ministry and to what you do as a woman, as a caretaker, as an Orthodox woman, and everything that you do. So thank you for, again, coming to us. Today is lecture 2, and we will be talking about, my gosh, I keep messing up the slide, supporting and nurturing balance for greater mental wellness. There you go. I knew it was a tongue twister, so I wanted to get it correct. So again, supporting and nurturing balance for greater mental wellness. So last week we talked about women's burnout and roles, and you talked about a lot of statistics and different roles and different everything that women particularly go through. So I'm really excited for tonight because I know we've been talking about this as well, kind of how we move forward. So we know sort of the facts and the situations that a lot of us are in, especially as females and as leaders, and all the roles and the hats that we take on, especially as mothers. So I know tonight and also following next week, we're going to be talking about how to go from there and building on for greater mental wellness. So no further ado, thank you so much, Dr. Agaby, for coming, and this is all yours.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that warm introduction. I appreciate it. And I look forward to being here today to talk more about the hopeful side of how to deal with some of the burnout issues that we talked about last week. And so last week we talked a lot about the burnout, its causes, the distress it causes to our mental wellness, and just in time for Mental Health Month, Awareness Month. And so in these 2 talks, I hope for things to get a little bit more hopeful and talk about some remedies, because this is something we should be introducing into the repertoire of our behaviors, kind of adding tools to our tool belt so that we don't feel like we're alone and suffering with this burnout. So last week we talked a lot about the symptoms and what that looks like, and that it kind of has this overarching feeling into every area of our life once it gets to the place of burnout. And hopefully we don't get there, but just recognizing what that looks like. So one of those things that we talked about was having to, first of all, recognize our symptoms, which was the kind of the purpose of last week, and recognizing when we're burned out. And then the second step was to start reversing those symptoms with maybe a change in lifestyle and a change in, just their presentation and the things that we do, learning some more boundaries. So today we're going to be talking about that part of it, how to reverse with greater balance in our lives. And then next week is the talk about building more resilience, which is a muscle. It's not something that we grow overnight. And like I talked last week, burnout doesn't happen overnight. So we're not going to cure it overnight either. So don't lose hope if you don't wake up one morning and suddenly everything is 100% better, but we're building muscle, and muscle takes time to build, and this is a mental muscle. And so one of the greatest things I want to talk about in order to learn about balance is that we don't sometimes know ourselves very well. And Aristotle was someone who said that knowing ourselves is the beginning of wisdom. So we have to know when things are a struggle, when things are starting to be a challenge, when we need to ask for help, when we need to lean on each other, because again, that is the beginning of all wisdom. So do you know yourself well is the first question I would ask. Are you clear about your wants and your needs? Do you have a clear sense of purpose and goals? Do you know what defines you, what gives you purpose, what gives you happiness, fulfillment, joy, meaning, purpose? All of those things are really, really important. Yeah. And a quote that I love very much is that the purpose of life is a life of purpose. Mm-hmm. So if we have a sense of purpose, our life will be fulfilled. And one of those things, again, is to not do a billion things unwell, but to do just a few really, really well. But doing them all with purpose and with a certain goal and things like that. The reason that we don't examine ourselves very well, sometimes we don't want to appear vulnerable, and vulnerability means that we don't want to appear weak. It could be a self-esteem issue. It could be that your dreams have been stifled by all this busyness and doing a million things, or there's too much noise around you, meaning too many people talking in your ear and telling you what you need to do and how to do it. And you're not really listening to maybe God's will in your life, or just your own internal voice that's telling you what the right direction is. So my first thing I would say to get some balance is to kind of face the problem head on, and to know that you can make improvements, and you can align what you want your outer self to look like, align it with your internal self, your goals, and seek those things that will give you that sense of purpose and things like that. So it's a journey to go on a journey of self-discovery. And in doing so, we need to recognize our strengths, which I'll talk a lot more about next time. But this is a whole branch of the field of positive psychology and resilience work, is recognizing what your strengths are. So you're recognizing that we all have these character strengths, these values that we carry with us, but we don't always lean in on those strengths. And so we're kind of going through life with just no aim and no purpose. But if we lean on our strengths, we tend to shut out all the negative things and focus more on our abilities and our strengths and things like that, and our life purpose. Also figuring out what long-term and short-term goals are. We'll talk about that as I go on today and also next time. And consider that from a biopsychosocial perspective. As, when we treat a client or a patient, we always try to look at them from a biological perspective, from a psychological perspective, a social, and even a spiritual perspective, and look at people holistically, and try to identify goals in that regard, goals in each one of those areas. And so we also need to find inspiration in things around us. Sometimes when we're burned out, we lose our sense of inspiration, and we don't find that sense of awe in nature or in books or in anything else. We kind of shut down those things that would give us a sense of purpose. And so it's really important that we start taking inventory, like I said, of our life in terms of that biopsychosocial, spiritual perspective. Where are things lacking? Where is there an area that we need to build in some more? Are we neglecting our physical selves? Are we not eating? Are we not sleeping? Are we not doing those things that we need to do? Maybe that's the area that needs to be built. Or maybe we have a lack of connection with God, or our spiritual perspective. Or maybe we're lacking in our social connection. So a lot of balance has to do with balancing those four areas in particular: the biopsychosocial and spiritual perspective. Maybe again, we're neglecting peer relationships or friends and family in lieu of doing other things that could be contributing to our burnout. And psychologically, we could be overwhelmed. We're working too hard. We're working too much. We're spending long hours doing things, and all of those things can create some difficulty as well. So think about some of the challenges that you're facing in your life. That is really, really important. Like, what do you blame for your problems? What are those areas that you're finding some difficulty? Has the hardship given you any insight into where you need to tap in? What have you learned from this difficulty or this hardship? Is there something that you're supposed to be learning out of this? Sometimes yes, and sometimes no. But are you problem solving, or are you just turning things over into despair? Are you discouraged, or are you hopeful? Did this challenge make you weaker in a sense, or stronger? Again, if we're leaning on our strengths, hopefully that builds us up and helps us to be stronger. But oftentimes, how can you promote the sense of balance in these areas that you're struggling in? Figuring out what areas, again, are out of balance. And I'll talk about kind of 8 areas of balance that we need to talk about here in a second. But what areas do you need more balance in? Where is your social network in all of this? Because one of the things I talked about last time is one of the first thing to go is we go and hide under a blanket and we don't want to see or talk to anyone, when in turn we should be doing the opposite, turning to our loved ones and people we trust to help us to grow. So what are those 8 areas that we need to kind of work on? And it doesn't mean we're going to be able to juggle all 8 simultaneously, but research tells us that the more we're able to balance those areas as best as we can and not neglect one in lieu of another, the healthier we will be and the more balanced we will feel. So one of those main things, of course, is spirituality, which ties really into this ministry and to our Orthodox faith and things like that. We have to be connected to God and our spirituality, and know there's something larger than us that's in control. And sometimes we forget about that and want to control everything. The next area is our intellect. Sometimes we just go into autopilot mode and we don't nurture our intellect. We're not reading new books or reading new material or feeding into the mind. And so that becomes a problem of things that we neglect as well. The next one is our physical health. Like I said before, we're not eating right. We are just eating on the run, not sitting down to have a meal or to have a conversation while having a meal. And we're just eating what is available, not usually, sometimes something healthy, or we're not sleeping enough hours. And I know we're all guilty of this, especially moms who are doing a billion things at a time. But we need to pay attention to our physical health, and that's really important as well that we forget. Our environment. Is our environment a place of peace, or is it a place of chaos? So that's something that needs to be balanced as well. And sometimes we forget about that. If there's chaos around us, it's going to contribute to chaos inside of us as well. Our financial well-being. Are we managing our money well? Are we using our finances within our means? Obviously, if we're living outside of our means, that's going to cause a stressor, causing you to work more to catch up, which will lead to burnout. That leads into occupational stressors, of course, and things that need to be balanced there. Are you working long hours that takes you away from family, from friends, from other meaningful activities? Work should be meaningful in and of itself. And so if it's not, we need to seek work that is beneficial mentally and physically and all of those things. And then socially and emotionally, those kind of tie together because our social networks provide us with a lot of comfort and support and encouragement. Our Bible tells us that iron sharpens iron. And so we need somebody to kind of help us along when we fall down. And so that's an area that needs to be nurtured as well as our emotional health. So those are the 8 areas that we kind of need to examine. And oftentimes when I talk with people, they're usually focusing a lot on things like occupation, financial, and they're neglecting a little bit the other 6. And with time, like I said, they're working harder and harder, neglecting the other things, and that causes some issues with balance. So the first thing that we need to do is to schedule some time for ourselves, our time with God, a time to listen and to gain, not just to always, like I said before, the little trickles that are leaving from our cup and we're not replenishing it. So we need to do some things to replenish that. Evaluate where the stressors are coming from and prioritize which ones are the most important, which ones are the ones that are going to give us a healthy lifestyle. And we need to learn to communicate effectively, which I'll get to shortly, because communication is the hallmark of that social component. If we don't know how to communicate, if we don't know what to say about what our needs are, or how to say no, or how to put boundaries on things, we're not able to communicate effectively. That's going to create a big problem. So like I talked about last time, not all stress is damaging. It can become damaging if our coping skills are not able to keep up. And that's when we start getting fatigued and burned out and exhausted because, again, our cup is getting depleted faster than we're refilling it. But stress can be a motivator. So not all stress is bad. It can be a motivator. It can get you to be focused. It can be optimal at some points. Think about if you have a presentation to do or a promotion that's coming up, a little bit of stress is going to motivate you to work towards that goal. But if it gets excessive, it's because your coping skills are not keeping up with the amount of challenges that you have. And then we have distorted messages that come along with excessive stress. that, we're worthless or we're unimportant or I'm broken, I can't heal from this. And the distorted messages cause a lot of problems. And we all know the story from the Bible of Mary and Martha, one that was working excessively, and the Bible even says the word distracted by serving too much, even though they were both believers and they were both wanting to believe in Christ and listen to him, but she was troubled with many things. Martha was. And so she was kind of told to slow down, and that Mary was the one that was listening. So we get distracted again because we are overworked. We have too many responsibilities. We don't have enough alone time. We don't have clearly defined downtime. Everything just kind of blends together. We have poor communication with ourselves and with others and with God even, of trying to figure out what our needs are. Mm-hmm. And again, as women, we are in an Orthodox women's ministry. So think about all of the duties that we have as women. We raise children. We are taking care of our families. We are caregivers for maybe elderly relatives or things like that. We are managing our homes. We are making dinners, 3 meals a day, 365 days a year. So that takes some time. Then on top of it, we have our career. We're trying to figure out our finances. We're on multiple services. I know I personally am. So there's also work in the community. So that's a lot to balance. And God has blessed us with the ability to multitask, but that also makes us tired. And as a result, women tend to be more depressed, like we talked about last time, because they're juggling so many things. So one of the things that may suffer from that is our relationship with God, our health, our relationships in general, with friends and colleagues and family members, and even our effectiveness can become problematic. So some studies that talked about this all the way back in the 60s, about 55 years ago or so. There were some studies done by some psychiatrists. This is a pretty famous study on the correlates between our health and some of the stressors that we face. So they created a kind of a system to label stresses with a number. And the higher your number was, the more correlates that they found with people that had physical illnesses as well. Mm. So we really need to balance those 8 areas, because even though those 8 areas are on all areas of our life, they have found from that research starting in the 60s that if we don't pay attention to these things, it doesn't only affect mental health, but it also affects physical health as well. So of course we need to put Christ in the center, God in the center. And some of the main things that we can do to balance out those 8 areas I talked about is to schedule time for yourself, and alone time with yourself, and alone time with God, or alone time with family. Literally put it into your schedule, because otherwise it's just going to be ignored. It's going to be neglected. And again, it sounds silly, but truly putting it down in your agenda book or in your phone or whatever, yeah. This is me time, is really, really important, or me and God time. Prioritize what is the most important. And that's really, really important as well, because we often try to do a million things at once, but prioritize what is the most important, and also prioritize a healthy lifestyle. Make it a priority to sleep and to eat healthy and to do those things. Again, we're going to learn in a minute how to communicate our needs well, because that's a big part of this, that we try to do everything and not delegate anything, and that creates a problem as well. So we have to learn how to communicate effectively. The Japanese have a concept with an interesting name. It's actually called ikigai, and that is a concept where you try to balance the things that you love with the things that you're good at, with the things that you need, and the things that you are paid for. Somewhere in the balance of those 4 things, you find your passion, you find your mission, you find your vocation, and you find your profession. And in those things, you find a nice, healthy balance between what you need, and gives you a sense of purpose and meaning. So we have to identify what our needs are. We have to communicate those. Create a plan for yourself, a plan that revolves around wellness, prioritizing your health and relationships. Kind of find a way to execute that plan. As you're going along the journey, we're going to savor and make sure that we're paying attention and being mindful of what's happening and mindful of our feelings. And then we're going to eventually reevaluate. Did this work? Did this not work? And as along we're doing this, we're also going to be resilient and flexible, which we'll talk about more next time. And you have to take time off at times, especially in major pivot points in your life, to figure out what you really need to do. Mm-hmm. Once it's gotten to a place of burnout, this is really when this ikigai perspective really needs to be met. And so we can't really reach our full potential if we are not doing what we love, if we're not looking at what we're good at, if we're not looking at our needs, and if we're not looking at, again, our vocation or what pays our bills. So in order to prioritize tasks, I wish I could show you guys this slide, but I'll try to describe it as best as I can. If you have something that is really urgent and it is really important, that is the first thing that needs to be on your list. This is something that has a deadline or is a major problem. That needs to be done first. The next thing that you would prioritize in your list of things to do priority-wise is something that may not be urgent, but is still really, really important. This is something in your schedule that you would plan, a recreational activity, even time with a friend, time with your relationships. It may not be urgent, but it's still really, really important. So it needs to go high on your priority list. The third thing is something that you can delegate. This may be something that is not as important, but could be something that is urgent. A meeting that is urgent, or an activity that is urgent, something that may interrupt you from doing the most urgent task on your list. But you can delegate it because it doesn't have to be done with you. And again, this is something I know that sometimes we struggle with, is what can I delegate? If it's not that important and somebody else other than you can do it, let somebody else do it that can help you along. And then unfortunately, when we get stressed out, we start putting all of our time into things that we shouldn't be doing, that will just procrastinate and prevent us from doing what we actually have to do. Unfortunately, that builds our stress and prevents us from balancing in our life. So these are things that we shouldn't do. Time wasters, trivial things, tasks that are not really important, but we're doing it to push things away that are really stressful. So instead, let's look at why it's stressful and figure out how to do this well so that we can get it out of the way and then save time for things that are a bigger priority. The next thing that we should do is learn how to communicate, because again, we don't know how to say no. We tend to pile on more and more things, and we have to learn how to communicate. We communicate by more than one thing. We communicate by our body language, our words, our gestures. And when we communicate, we can see another person's perspective as well as our own. We can learn about other people's feelings. We can learn about my feelings, what my ambitions and goals are. And so it's this open communication that goes back and forth, and really helps us to kind of figure out what we really need and how we can get it. And communication is not just me talking. It's about talking and listening at the same time. It's both verbal and nonverbal. It's a two-way street, and thus the respect is a two-way street. So if you can't do something, it's important to communicate and listen at the same time. Respect other people's opinions. And oftentimes we're listening to respond. We really should be listening to understand what people are saying and resist arguing or interrupting or preaching or judging or all of these things, because that's not helpful for communication. Another thing we should communicate is our emotions, and people often have a very hard time speaking to what their emotions are. But you can at least start with simple 4 emotions. And those are: I'm feeling happy or joyful, I'm feeling fearful or anxious, I'm feeling sad or depressed, or I'm feeling angry. And at least those 4 will give you a hint to what's going on. And a mix of those emotions will produce a lot more complex emotions, disappointed or unheard or any of those things. But fear is usually a braking system to tell you, slow down, maybe shouldn't do this, look at it twice. Obviously, if it's too much anxiety, that's something that we need to talk about clinically and find a way around that clinically. Same with depression. But usually there's a signal that is telling you there's something wrong here and you need to examine this. And the more we listen to those emotions, the more information we have, and the more we can balance what is out of balance in that category. Unfortunately, people don't like emotions because they think they'll lose control if they have an emotion, or will appear weak, or I'll appear angry. Usually anger means there's some sort of injustice happening that I need to pay attention to. So emotions are information, and we should use them as such. Similar to touching a hot stove and telling your hand to move away. Emotions are really necessary for life. We have to listen to our emotions to figure that out. I think that it is hard for people to communicate because, again, it makes them vulnerable. And again, we don't like to appear vulnerable. We just want to go, go, go. But that's not good, because eventually that will lead to a breakdown of some sort. or they don't know how to feel. Like I said, start with those first four emotions. Or they think no one will understand me or will think I'm weak and they won't accept me. And of course, we want to be accepted. But it is important to kind of open ourselves up. There's a Rumi quote that I love, that the wound is where the light enters. And so that helps us to kind of see things that need seeing and need to be fixed and need to be kind of organized. So communicate often, listen often, forgive often, be respectful and kind when you're speaking, stick to the issues that you need to stick to, and that will help us with effective communication as well. There's kind of three styles of communicating. One that is really good and the other two are not so good. One is just being passive and letting everybody do whatever they want, and just not listening to your own needs at all. You're more concerned about other people. Unfortunately, that builds resentment with time because you're just letting people do whatever they want. You don't know how to say no. You apologize unnecessarily. You let other people decide for you. And so that builds a lot of resentment with time. The opposite end is someone who's really aggressive, always pushing their agenda, accusing others all the time, mocking others, maybe even threatening others. Their opinion is all that matters. And that doesn't lead to good communication either. Instead, we need to be really assertive, to describe what is bothering us and to communicate well and to be well composed in those areas. And you still at the same time are caring about the other person's feelings. You're being respectful, but you're also stating your point very firmly and fairly, and that helps with communication a lot as well. So between those things, we are balancing a lot of different things here. You're balancing your spirituality, you're balancing your relationship with yourself and your relationship with others, kind of all in like a little bit of a triangle, and relating to each other and to the world at the same time. The other important thing to balance is to remember your values. What are the most important things to you? Again, you're prioritizing rather than just trying to do everything that isn't very fulfilling. You're also open to a journey because this is going to take time. Again, we haven't built these walls or these problems overnight, and so it's going to take some time to heal from them. So be open to a journey, ask a lot of questions and consult along the way with people that can help you, and know that this is going to be a process with some time. It's also really helpful to write out your goals, because how are you going to get to the place that you're going to get to, except to write out your long-term and your short-term goals, plan them in a way that they're measurable, that you have a timeline for them so it's not done indefinitely, and that it's a goal that is, you're going to be able to achieve it. It's a reasonable goal, so you're going to be able to achieve it. And maybe you have some milestones along the way that you know that you're reaching your goals. Like when you're going to drive to somebody's house, they tell you about the milestones along the way, or the guideposts. You're going to turn at this drugstore or turn right over here. And so you know exactly where you're going and you know how you're going to get there. And you know the resources that you're going to need to get there as well. So that helps you to balance things also. And then once you've reached your goal, reevaluate. How did you get there? Were there any obstacles in the way? Was there any challenges that you faced? And that reevaluation helps you to kind of meet your goals as well. Again, with balance, and this will be kind of something that will segue to next week as well, is that we need to balance a lot of different things. There's those 8 things that we talked about, but mostly we're trying to balance our spirituality, our physicality, our intellect, our relationships, and our emotions. And we're focusing all of those different things to get a sense of accomplishment, a sense of meaning, a sense of engagement in the things that we're doing. We're not just doing it mindlessly. And along the way, we have positive emotions to kind of boost our morale and things like that. And one of the most important things to do is to solve problems as they come so they don't build up, because oftentimes people will build up their emotions, build it more and more and more, or they stuff their emotions down until it becomes like a pressure cooker, and then kaboom, everything explodes. So don't keep those emotions down. Just process them and let them go. Process them and let them go so they don't accumulate. If you can't do it alone, talk to your priest, talk to your therapist, talk to a psychologist. But accepting the problems that we're doing, that's another thing people do, is they put their heads in the sand like an ostrich and think that they're problems that are just going to pass by. And if I don't pay attention to it, it'll go away. But in reality, it just grows and grows and grows, and the danger gets bigger and bigger. And research tells us facing it head on is actually the better thing, as uncomfortable as it is. But face it head on, then you can just get rid of it and move on to the next thing. So that's really important as well. And finally, we talked last time a little bit about savoring. That's a concept in positive psychology. Really, really important for balance, because oftentimes we are just rushing through life. We're rushing through that cup of coffee in the morning. We're rushing through our conversations. We're not sitting calmly and focusing on what we are doing. And so it's really, really important to savor. Research tells us that when we do that, we bank and store those positive feelings that come with savoring. And we can kind of withdraw from that savings account, if you will, during a darker time. So celebrate the good things. Have a cup of coffee with a friend. We talked about that last time a little bit. Or have a lunch with a friend and spend that hour and enjoy the person's company. That helps to regulate us as well and keep us balanced. So when we have all that great balance, then we can start building resilience, which we'll talk about more next week. But resilience is the scientific study of how we can thrive even in the midst of difficulties and challenges by adapting to the situations that we're in. And again, this is a word that's thrown around a lot, but it's a true scientific concept. So we'll talk more about that next week for sure. So that's what I have on balance, and some questions would be good.
Wow.
Yeah.
That was, oh my gosh. Like, again, just so much, definitely feeding the intellect. I'll say that for personally. Thank you so much, Dr. Agdabi. I'm going to leave it with you. Well, I'll leave it. We have a little time, which is great as well. So if there's any questions, go ahead and DM us or write a comment. I was just writing notes because there's so much richness since your talk. So thank you again for sharing that. On such a important topic. And I think, I've for years, I mean, personally, you hear this word balance in so many conversations from so many different peoples, from celebrities to, life coaches. And you're like, what is balance? And, and I feel like at times as we get older, as moms as well, like, is that even achievable? And I think you nicely broke down the 8 aspects, but at the same time, I feel like there's so many questions in my head personally, is like, and I love how you, the majority of your talk, you really, at least how I took it, is you took a lot of it is self-awareness and self-reflection.
Right.
So, someone just told me my comments are turned off. No, I think they're on. Oh, no,
now it's on.
back on. Now it's back on.
Yeah.
Okay, hopefully they are on. So thank you for that. Hopefully the comments are on. If not, just send me a private message, or Dr. Agabi private message as well for question. But yeah, so I feel like a lot of the things you're mentioning, it was just echoing. A lot of it is self-reflection is so powerful. There's always the philosophers that you mentioned, Aristotle, like a day. I think Plato also said this: a day unreflected is a day unlived. You hear that a lot, right? And St. Anthony says something as well.
Yeah.
But I guess my question is, to start it off again, is, yeah, like, how do you, I mean, it's just so hard, I mean, I know everyone has their things on their plate, like you said, and prioritizing and the list. And I think that will probably clear up once you kind of prioritize the demands, the needs, all those things that you laid out. But I mean, is there like, I don't want to say ideal, but is there a way to really find balance? I guess I don't know. I know that's a very general, like, I guess, is it balance just because we know how to move all the moving pieces, and how to, like, okay, I need to maybe, I mean, in an ideal world, I could do less hours at work. I need to spend more time with my kids. I need to, like, as much as we can. Is it, kind of having those boundaries, I guess.
Yeah, the boundaries is really key, but it's also knowing where is this burnout coming from. So again, if you are, unfortunately, sometimes people are living outside their means, or they're spending all their time at work and not enough time with their family, or what things can you minimize or cut out? It is the burnout, like we talked about last time, is potentially going to require a change in lifestyle. And I know that is hard because we get attached to people, places, and things. But if you really want to work on the balance piece, it's going to require, where can I cut things out to make another area more balanced? So as long as you're not putting everything into one of those 8 circles and neglecting the other 7,
Yeah.
that's where the problems occur. And like I said, with my clients, mostly I'm seeing it is the occupational and financial. They're putting
Mm,
all of their energy into occupational and financial, and neglecting family, neglecting their social life, neglecting their spiritual life, and focusing only on that arena. And again, they're not even doing intellectual things. They're not feeding their mind. They're not feeding their emotions. They're just working, and that leads to a lot of burnout. And we see that unfortunately in a lot of professions as well, like residents or just a lot of professions are requiring more and more demand.
yeah.
And so where do we draw the line to say, I need a break, or I can't do this, or the burnout is not something to say, look at me, I've done all the work that I can,
Yeah.
and this is a badge of honor. That's not a badge of
Yeah.
honor. It's problematic for health, physical and mental.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we can't get to that point.
So what would you say? No, that's a great point. But what would you say, like, say a family, obviously in our, I know, especially in the Coptic world, there's so many
Yeah.
doctors, those who are like have demanding hours
Mm-hmm.
or on calls, how would you, I know I have like a friend who's an oncologist, she's almost
A lot of
completely
hours.
burned out.
Yeah.
What would you recommend if you are not able to, for example, cut the occupation?
Mm-hmm.
Like what, I guess, would that become like short term or long term,
Mm-hmm.
or like how would you, I guess, you approach that? And I know every situation is different,
Yeah.
but
So it goes back to that Japanese concept. You have to find what you love, and you have to put meaning back into your life at some point.
mm,
Otherwise, you're going to continue to burn this candle until it burns to nothing.
yeah,
Yes, we do have to work. That's one of the parts of this Japanese ikigai concept. You have to work. You get paid. You have to pay your bills and meet your needs and things like that. But focus on what you're good at. Focus on what you're paid for. Focus on what you need, which is not something that we often recognize or
yeah,
pay attention to, and also what you love. Those in
mm,
combination together is what gives us the passion, the mission, and the profession and vocation as well, and gives us a sense of purpose and meaning. But again, if we're focusing just on what I'm getting paid for,
yeah,
and I'm neglecting what I love on my days off or on my needs, and people are doing that because they're tired. So on their days off, they're just sleeping.
yeah,
But we need to infuse some meaning back in there to give you some purpose and some encouragement and things like that. If she can maybe take time to maybe volunteer or do something else
mm,
associated with her profession, that she clearly loves and has studied a long time for, but still infuses some meaning back, that may be something that could be helpful too.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. That's definitely. I'm just keep on. I do have a question that I'm gonna read out loud in a moment. I
Mhm.
just I just keep on, as you're talking, I just keep on saying, I wish we've had these classes at like high school,
Yes.
or life classes, whatever you would call them,
Hmm.
right? And even
Hmm.
at the church level,
Yeah.
I mean, I know it's growing across the board, which is very promising within our communities,
Hmm.
but I think, we teach so much
Hmm.
on the occupation and society and all these, but we
Hmm.
don't teach, in my
Hmm.
opinion, life skills. And
Yeah.
those are so crucial because, as
Yeah.
you know, of course, as a therapist, that it pours into everything
Hmm.
else. If you have weak emotional wellness
Hmm.
and mental wellness, all these other things, everything else, and you've
Yep.
said that so many times. So
Yeah.
it's just so interesting how even like this educational system, it's not
Hmm.
enough, in my opinion, preparing us to
Hmm.
balance, to
Hmm.
have all these tools
Hmm.
to do that. Because if you're not raised, say, okay, let's think about how to balance my social life, my spiritual life, or my financial
Hmm.
wellness. A typical American lifestyle, I don't want to say typical, but generally speaking, right?
Hmm.
A lot of us live over our means and
Yeah.
we overwork,
Yep.
right? That's a typical
Absolutely.
American
Absolutely.
lifestyle,
Hmm.
unfortunately.
Yeah.
And so it's more prone to
Hmm.
burnout and mothers and so
Hmm.
forth. Um, I hope we could
Yeah.
change that. I don't know how.
Yeah.
I'm sure you have in
It's
your
got to go
world,
from a
definitely.
societal level, maybe down, but
Yeah.
it's also advocating for ourselves when we need a break or we need something different, and to say this isn't really working. I need
Yeah.
more in this or less in this, and that takes courage. And that's
It
one of the
does.
character strengths I'll talk about more next
Yes.
week. That takes courage to advocate for those needs that you have. First, you have to recognize them, then you have to advocate for them, then you have to do them.
Yeah.
Um, and that's a process, and it takes time.
Yeah. I love that. I don't know if we mentioned this last week, but it just popped in my mind, for example, like the needs
Hmm.
and the overworking, especially again, as women in the ministry, but as
Hmm.
mothers, but like in this culture as well, like knowing maternity leave,
Mhm.
just a basic human right. I would say
Yep.
it's a human right.
Mhm.
We completely, it's off the
Mhm.
charts. And I know people are taking the
Yep.
courage and acknowledging this is what we need.
Mhm.
And they're trying to fight a system. I
Mhm.
mean, you know,
Yeah.
and it's sort of making little waves in certain
Mhm.
states,
Mhm.
but it needs to
Yeah.
change radically. And the mentality has to change. Yeah. I
Absolutely.
completely agree because there's a lot of countries who I think got it a lot better,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
we
Mhm.
hope. I'm gonna go ahead and read because I could ask you questions all day. I'm gonna
Right.
where did my question go? So here's a quick question. I have a quick question about being a woman where self-sacrifice is glorified and expected. Where is the line between being Christ-like and balancing?
Yeah. Great question.
Yeah,
Great
it is a great
question.
question.
Um, yes, we are always sacrificing for others, and that's wonderful. But again, if you are depleting your own health, mental health, and physical health, how can you possibly serve others? It cannot be done. You cannot be depleted and also serving. We have to rest, we have to eat, we have to take care of our needs as well. And unfortunately, again, we're raised with that mentality, either on purpose or just not on purpose, but it's kind of part of the message that if you're not giving everything that you are to another person, then you're not, doing your job as a woman and things like that. But again, you cannot care for another person when you're completely depleted. It's just not physically or emotionally possible. So in caring for yourself, you're actually going to be caring for other people in the process. I'm all for sacrifice, and yes, that is a great character strength and a spiritual strength. But again, if you're doing it to a point where you're breaking, you're not at service at all to anyone else.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
mhm.
yeah. Beautiful, beautiful. Well said. I think that was a great question and fantastic answer. I think that's a lot of us relate to as women, as cops, as
Mhm.
Orthodox, as every part, I guess, of our identity.
Yeah.
Um, no, it's fascinating because, what comes to mind as well is especially within the church, right? Is like serve, 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 serve till you kind of drop.
Yeah.
And I know a lot of the priests, it's kind of infused, especially in the Coptic world and in many other worlds as well, that you kind of serve until you're depleted. Like
Mhm.
you said, and especially as
Mhm.
women, that's like you have to,
Mhm.
you know. So
Yeah.
that's interesting as boundaries.
Yeah.
I know I personally struggle with that, and
Mhm.
there's the mix of guilt and shame, and you got to
Mhm.
do this, and
Mhm.
yeah, I love that, and I think
Mhm.
we have to overemphasize. No,
Mhm.
we also the boundaries and self-care is
Mhm.
also returning back,
Mhm.
filling our cup is going to
Mhm.
pour out as well. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, the more you refill yourself and you feel healthy, the more you're going to be able to pour out onto others. Again, I have a sign in the main clinic part of my office that says you cannot pour out from an empty cup, and it's so true. It's so simple and yet so true. And so, not to the point where you're breaking. Of course, we should serve. Of course, we should help others. And altruism, you'll see next week when we talk about it, is very much connected to resilience. So, the more you do for others, the more happier you will feel, but not to the point of completely depleting yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for that. If there's any other questions, go ahead for that. I know I had more, so I know we have a few more minutes. Um, what are, I guess, I know you're going to be speaking about this more next week, but what are some, I guess, tips? I know you talked about communicating our needs, which I absolutely love because I know a lot of us, especially emotionally, it's very
Mm-hmm.
challenging. What are, I guess, some methods or some tools you would say? I guess my initial question would be, what are some tips you would say how to communicate? Okay, this is what I need, and then I guess this intertwines with so many things we've been talking about. Sacrificing mothers,
Mm-hmm.
um, and saying, actually, emotionally or mentally or all these other things within my balance, this is what I need. How can we even recognize that
Mm-hmm.
in ourselves? Communicate, because I know for myself personally, um, and I know this is probably also woman thing is probably how you're raised. There's so many factors, but a lot of times we take on more than we can do, right? When do we actually acknowledge, oh, no, I should say no to that, or
Mm-hmm.
like I need this,
Mm-hmm.
until it's
Again,
before burnout, I guess.
yeah, again, it's important to listen to your feelings. If something is not sitting very well, why
Mm,
is it not sitting well? And to follow that emotion. But usually we just put a lid on it and say, sure, I'll do that, and put a smile on, and then later I'm either depleted or broken down because I've done this, or I've added too much to my plate, or it's overwhelming. And again, prioritize which one is more important for me to do, which one's more fulfilling for me to do, and do that. And if you're communicating with someone, speak from a place of your emotions. This is a very simple tool that therapists use, is to use I statements. When this happens, I feel this.
Yeah.
A very simple tool. So that way you're not making the other person feel defensive, or it's not something that they did. You know, your feeling is this, and you're allowed to have your feelings. It's okay. If you can find a compromise and do it at a later time or at another place or something like that, then maybe there's still time for it, but not at, again, a point where it's going to deplete you or break you down or make you work harder or something like that. So again, giving is great, but not to the point of hurting you in the process in some way.
Yeah. Yeah. I think a lot of women, a lot of mothers definitely need that. I think we need to be told that our needs, our emotions are our priority. And I think that's it. And I think there's a shift, at least I've been following a lot of parenting, and that's more emphasized, I think.
Yeah.
I mean, I've been a mom for a couple years now, but I think that shift is important because in time with the previous question, yeah, there's that glorification of sacrifice, but it's self-depleting besides self-emptying. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's okay to feel your feelings. They are valid, and follow that emotion to see where it's going to lead you.
Yeah.
And you don't have to live there forever. People sometimes think also that they have to live in an emotion. An emotion is a signal. It's an alarm signal telling you something is wrong here. Pay attention to it, and then problem solve around it, figure it out, reframe your thinking around it, and then you can move on. But at least pay attention to it initially.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. I think, again, it just keeps on coming in my mind, just awareness. I think that's really powerful.
Yeah.
That's one of the strongest tools that we have. And it is definitely a divine gift from God, just to reflect and have awareness. I do love as well, I'm just going over my notes as well. I love what you talked about, self-discovery, that it's a whole journey, and recognizing our strengths. I think especially, you know, with career choices and a lot of and day-to-day choices, even, but especially career, I feel like is a big thing, especially within our communities. I know a lot of careers predominate in certain communities, right, cultures, and I know a lot of people are very unhappy because of that, unfortunately. But I love how you emphasize that knowing our strengths and kind of that in itself will shut out the negativity. No, it's fantastic. I personally pursued something I love, but still trying to find my career path. But
It's okay.
as a female, I guess.
Yeah.
in theology. But no, it's incredible. I think balance is such a key, and I think it's something that we definitely need to talk about more, and really emphasize that this is a God-given right and God-given all these parts that God has created and within us, and make us complete. That all these kind of components within us, spiritually, intellectually, mentally, emotionally, all these things make up the human being. And if we are in balance because of our broken world, but it's up to us to kind of balance that out, and within our calling, our journey of healing, and there's so many levels to that. So yeah, thank you so much. Any last, I think I have another question, and if there's anything else you'd like to add. Oh, another question. How can I tell the difference between burnout or maybe a larger mental health issue we have? I know we talked about this briefly, but if you want to go ahead and last week, if you want to go ahead and that.
So I would refer you to also listen to last week's talk for more in depth on that. But just real briefly, the burnout is a cynicism that kind of blankets everything else in our life. So it may start with too much time at work and you're burned out at work, but then you can't come home and take care of your family. You can't come home and talk to your kids about their day or do those meaningful services or things like that, because you're just done. You're just completely done. Whereas depression is a clinical syndrome as well, that is similar to burnout. That has a lot more to do with things like it's like 2 weeks or more of your functioning being affected. Your frequency of your symptoms is affected. You're sad. Your appetite is affected. Your sleeping habits is affected. You're just more sluggish. And we talked about even the difference between stress and burnout, where stress may energize you initially, because you have to get more and more done, like you're running on a treadmill. With burnout, you just want to quit. You just want to quit everything, not just the work that may be contributing to the burnout, but you really want to just stop everything and not do it. And so it's gotten to a place where it is almost clinical, because your function, anytime your functioning is affected, it could be something clinically that needs to be looked at, because your functioning is really, really important. And functioning doesn't just mean going to work every day from 9 to 5 or whatever, but functioning with relationships. You don't engage with your family and friends anymore, or you don't talk to people, or you don't go out like you used to, and you're just staying home all the time. So anytime your functioning is affected, this is when it becomes a clinical issue. If your frequency of your symptoms have increased, like I said last time, everybody gets depressed, everybody gets anxious, but has the frequency increased? Has the intensity of your symptoms increased? Has the duration of your symptoms increased? And has your functioning been affected? Those 4 ingredients usually tell you something clinical is going on. And usually it's about 2 weeks or more that you've been feeling that way, right? Because if your leg's been hurting for 2 weeks or more, of course you're going to go to a physician for that. You're not going to walk around with leg pain for 2 weeks and not go see somebody for that. So why not our mental health?
That's a great point. Yeah, it's always something with mental health. We're like, oh, it's just, because it's something, I guess, intangible, right?
Right.
So
and
to
you
speak.
think
Yeah.
that you're just going to snap out of it, or last time we talked about, this is just a sin, so I need to pray more, or I need to fast more, which is fine. Go fast and pray, but you also need clinical care to help you through it.
Yeah. No, thank you for that. Is there a possible way, I know we have a few more minutes. Thank you for those questions, by the way. Is there, gosh, how do I word this? From burnout, is there a possible way to, like, we could say, okay, we could bounce out of it, right? But is there sort of a quote unquote, like, measurable time? Obviously, everyone is different. Every situation is different. But is there sort of, like, I don't know, statistic, generally speaking, you could say, oh, like, to come out of burnout or even depression. The reason why I ask this, because again, I'm quite intrigued that, of course, there's always so many layers to it, but because we're living in this post-pandemic world, I do hate that word, pandemic, that word, hate pandemic.
Yeah.
But the reality is, and you shared that statistic, which was, I think, 63% or something, very high, especially among Americans, that are we going to bounce out of this? Because I feel like there's just people in a big lull. And I thought, oh, people are working from home and feel more balanced, but actually I feel like it's not. And it's kind of productive, or people are more isolated. It's so many things.
Right.
So I just wonder if there's kind of, like, in a psychological world, is there like a time frame of, like, bouncing out of burnout, and as well, of course, depression, I know, is a separate thing. So just wanted to know.
There's specific evidence-based treatments that we use, and some of them can help people to feel better in as little as 6 weeks, but everybody is different. I've had some clients for literally years, and I've had other clients that are more short-term, and they can, so some things are more chronic, like there's chronic physical illnesses, and that doesn't mean that, they're so far gone. It's manageable, but some people need to manage it for years, and other people can manage it and leave and come back for a booster session, if you will. But everybody's kind of different in this area, but some of the treatments can make people feel better within a few weeks. It's, in terms of reframing people's thinking and how they think and how to change their behavioral patterns. But again, we don't want to put a timeline on it either, because everybody's different, number one, and you didn't build this overnight, and so it's not going to be removed overnight. There's no magic wand that I can just wave and say, now you're magically better, or even a pill from psychiatry. These things work together. A psychiatrist and therapists and psychologists all work together to help people to reach their full potential, and many things can be used and prescribed, evidence-based treatments that can help for a variety of different things, but it varies. It varies is the short answer.
Yeah. But there's always hope. There's always a solution.
Always hope.
And of course, with our faith, we always believe, and we hope for hope and faith and healing. That's for sure. I think healing is definitely key, and we all need healing.
Yeah, we
Thank
always
you so
look for mitigating factors and their strengths, and that helps as well.
Yeah. Thank you so much again, Dr. Christine Agaby, for giving us such an enriching, essential, overdue lecture, in my opinion, in our world we're living now. I know you've given endless of lectures, so I know you have contributed so much in your community and our community and everywhere. that you have been to. So thank you for all your work and what you do and who you are.
Thank you.
I pray that this topic and this mental wellness, just this beautiful phrase that actually you shared with me for the series, is really ingrained in all of us. And I think especially with today about balance and all those different aspects, and you know, the comparison that you did with the Japanese culture, which is also very beautiful. I think we could always learn from other parts of the world, is we're all human and we're all struggling. And I think just normalizing those needs and communicating those needs. And communication, you mentioned, was quite big as well, which I loved. And that journey and that self-awareness, I think those are really key integral tools, I would say, to equip us with life, period.
Absolutely.
You know, again, I'm still mind blown. Like, I'm in my 30s and I'm like, how did I not learn this in high school? You know, like, I don't remember algebra much. I mean, hopefully I do enough for my life, but you know, it's just, but these things are something that we need to be equipped, especially as women, especially as Christians, especially in every part of our lives, just day-to-day life.
Yeah,
you know. So thank you for what you do.
Thank you. Thank you.
And I am
here.
No, it's our pleasure, it's our honor, it's our blessings. I'm so excited for next week as well. Next week, don't miss it. It'll also be live on Instagram Wednesday at 8:30 to complete our series, and hopefully again we'll have Dr. Agabi. Definitely will be in the loop, and we're not gonna let her go. So we're definitely be working in together in the future. And again, if you guys have ideas or comments or suggestions, we're also open to them. So thank you for supporting us. Don't miss next week's lecture 3, the final of the series, Spiritual and Psychological Resilience for the Modern Orthodox Woman. So I think that's a great topic that's going to kind of summarize and complete the series. To, like you said, Dr. Agabi said, that strengthening our muscles of resilience. And I think all of us definitely, whatever age, whatever stage, whatever gender you are, well, male and female, that you know, we really equip ourselves with resilience and strength and divine power that we have been given and we have been blessed.
Absolutely.
So thank you so much again, Dr. Agabi, everything you've done for this world and for your communities.
Thank you.
And thank you for everyone who's been listening. Thank you for the questions. Continue, please, to support us and pray for us. And this live lecture will be broadcasted on our YouTube channel shortly after, as well as our Instagram channel if you have missed the lecture. I encourage you again also to go back to last week's lecture. It is already posted on our account. Spread the word, pray for us, and have a great night, everyone, or morning, wherever you are in the world. And we'll see you next week. Thank you so much again. Thanks, Dr. Take care.
Thanks.
Bye.
Good night.
Good night.